All right, so this is, you're probably accustomed to this already. This is the home page of the course. I know some teachers don't use announcements a lot. I do use them a lot. So oftentimes, if you have a question, it's answered there in the announcements. Each week, I put out a welcome announcement for the week. And in that announcement is summarized every assignment that is due during the week and what day it's due on. So that's all there for you on that weekly announcement. You can do the same thing by going to the modules and seeing all of the assignments that are there, but this is just a summary. And then down underneath in other news, I have additional study content. This is just a link to a pretty informal page I started. It actually is just a Google Docs document that has a whole bunch of additional information I've just sort of pieced together over years of teaching the course. I teach it for BYU Idaho. I also teach it at Eastern Arizona College down in Southern Arizona. I'll click on that just to show you kind of what it is. So again, it's just a Google Doc. It's got content for every chapter. There's a lecture, which some people like, but most people do not love lectures. There's some self-tests. This is content that comes from the textbook publisher, Wiley, but it's not found in the new Wiley stuff, even though it matches up still with the content. And the reason I've included it is because many students tell me that these self-test questions feel closer to the exam questions than the homework questions feel close to the exam questions. So that's there to kind of give you a sense of what to expect on the exam questions. Also, some videos. These are just videos I've put together, recorded on YouTube. So that are like B versions of some of the homework problems. Sometimes if you get stuck on a homework problem, you can check there. And then usually like a little quick review of the chapter content. So that's what's in this additional study content document. Some people think it's great and use it a lot. Others don't. They use the stuff from the textbook publisher, and that's, you know, that works well for them. So it's just there for you. None of it is mandatory. Also, if you ever forget the link to this weekly class meeting, it's always here in the weekly announcement. If we're not going to have a meeting this week or something, I'll post it here, although I'll usually try to also post a specific announcement saying we had to cancel the meeting or something. But you should just plan on 6 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time. That's Idaho time. And that's it. So just check the announcements, I guess is what I'm getting at. There's usually valuable information there. And then the course is set up in modules. So, you know, just follow the module. When in doubt, come to the module. So we're in week 2, and just start at the introduction and work your way through. One clue to help you know what are the items you have to actually submit for a grade is anything that has a due date like that are things that need to be submitted, as opposed to like this reading thing, or you know, that doesn't necessarily have, or the Q&A support forum. That's not a required thing. That's just a place you can go to ask questions. So that helps as well. Also, the extra credit. So every 2 weeks, I have a little extra credit discussion. It is not mandatory. It's extra credit. But because the system, the Canvas, which is the learning management system, it doesn't do well with extra credit assignment categories. If I add them in now before all of the assignment categories are populated, and like the final exam category won't be populated till the very end of the course, then it looks like the extra credit's reducing your grade. So instead, I don't add it in, but then it looks like the extra credit's not doing anything for your grade. Know that at the very end, if you fully participate in the extra credit, so I'm limited, I can only offer like 1%. So if you fully participate in it at the end, you'll get a 1% bump to your grade. So, you know, if you had an 88, now you'll have an 89. If you halfway participate, it'll be a 0.5% bump to your grade. Most people participate because they actually like the discussions where we're having this discussion of spiritual things and how they relate to some of the accounting principles. But it's always interesting. There's always somebody who chooses not to, and then they get down to the very end and they are a 0.5% away from moving up to that B plus instead of a B. And then they're asking, well, what can I do for my grade? And it's like, well, you could have participated in the extra credit, right? So that's just want you to know that's there, and a lot of people find it valuable. Let's see, hold on, I got something popping in the chat. Okay, so that's generally how the course is laid out. Any general type of questions, not specific questions about problems, but general types of questions I could ask for you. Or I mean, not ask, could answer for you.
Yes, I'm not fast enough typing, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Homework assignment. So I went in and I did my homework and
Uh-huh.
I didn't know how to do a few things, so I backed out. And then I came back in and it gave me a whole new homework assignment. And then I backed out and now I'm gonna have to redo it all again. Like, does it refresh and you have to do all new every time?
So no, you should be able to save at the bottom of the assignment. You can either save your work or you can submit your work. And so if you hit save, it should save it. I've never heard of someone having a problem where it doesn't save before.
It's user error, I'm sure. I'll go back and try again.
Okay, yeah, you should be able to save your progress. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. Thank goodness.
Oh, that's good to know because I'm on my second round. So that's good to know.
Okay, I'm sorry.
No, it's like I said, user error.
Okay, well, it's not like an apology. Sorry, it's like a I feel for you. Any other general questions that I can try to answer for you before we? Yes, is it
Feos?
Feos?
Yeah, I wanted to know what's due to this evening is the study, the self-study. There were instructions on how to do the accounting, how to say all the different sections that we had to go through. I'm not quite sure how to say it, but I had a hard time with some of the numbers. It was hard for me to understand. So I lost, some of that information. Is there a way to get some help? Extra help with that?
So with the required self-study, it's really just meant to be review material that you go through. You should get full credit just for going through the material, even if, but of course, whether or not you get credit for it, what you want to do is make sure you understand the material, right? Certainly you can come to this meeting with specific questions and I will try to answer those. Also, I posted to the announcements some tutoring sessions with the course teaching assistants, where is another place you can go to get questions answered. And then finally, right over here, this tutoring resources button is a place where you can go and you can post questions, and the tutors as well as the instructors, actually we get notifications when people post here, and usually you get some community help. So those are all three sources of assistance. They just started this tutoring resources last semester, so it's relatively new. So some of us as instructors are still figuring it out, but you can see the amount of content. In fact, probably the downside to it is there's so much content you can almost get lost in it. But I've seen a lot of good things in here, and a lot of good things being answered by tutors. So all of those are options for additional help.
And another question for you. Thank you for that. That's a great resource. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the sign-in for the homework. I don't quite understand how that works in the module section.
The sign in for the homework?
I'm sorry, the sign up, that's an interpreter error, the sign up.
Okay, so we're talking about the homework support discussion. Is that the,
Is that what that is? I mean, is that the
I think
thing
so.
that
I'll try and show that. So what happens is the part of the BYU Idaho learning model is that we teach one another. And so they have a homework support discussion. Everybody's split into homework support groups. And each person signs up for a specific, actually it's 2 weeks during the course. They sign up for a specific problem from the homework set, and then it's their job to produce a tutorial for the other students in their group. Some people do a video, some people just create a slideshow, a PowerPoint or some other type of slideshow to show people how to do things. You're free to be creative and do it in whatever way works best for you. So the way it's set up, I'm going to go to the homework support sign up. I'll just randomly choose one of the groups here. Really what we're asking is that people, the first person who signs up to copy and paste this and then put their name next to the week they want to sign up for. And you'll see that each one of these lines represents 2 weeks. This is week 4 with this assignment, and then later in week 9, they'll do this assignment for the group. And then the next person to sign up will copy and paste so that it retains the last person's, the one they chose, and add their name to it, and so forth until everybody has signed up to teach one of these. Then what will happen is once these are done, I'll create a summary and I'll post it. I'll post a link to that summary in the announcement so that everybody can see their, the week they've signed up for. And then during that week, there'll be an opportunity to submit your little tutorial for that assignment. Did that help clarify?
Yeah, I just wasn't sure which one to do. Like, how do you go about that? It's all new to me.
I mean, you just choose. The thing is these are all in the future, meaning you don't really know any of this material yet. It'll be material we're covering that week. So the only factor in choosing for me would be if there was a week that I was unavailable. If I thought I wouldn't be able to do an extra assignment that week, I would not choose that week. But otherwise, you just choose one, and then that will be when it's your turn. Some people like to wait until later in the course, so they choose one down here so they can see how others have done the assignment. Others have done something similar in other courses, so they sign up for earlier ones. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Any other general type questions? And it's okay if you think of one later. You can interrupt. I won't be offended.
I have one.
Okay.
Sorry. So for the sign up, this isn't a weekly Zoom meeting where we get together with a group. This is just a submission to our group, a video that we record or a I don't know.
Yes, no, you're exactly right. So so what'll happen is once these signups happen, then everybody will be added to a discussion group. Okay, again, so this section of the course has 50 students. So I've created 5 of these groups, and I have 2 sections. So I've actually got 10 of these groups of 10 students each, and you'll be added to a discussion group. And then when it's your turn, you just create your video. Some people create a video in YouTube and then post the link. Others use other video capture. And like I said, others don't even use video capture. They just create a PowerPoint file or an Excel file that demonstrates how to do it. You're free to use whatever tool or whatever presentation you want. Some people have a friend video them doing it on a whiteboard. I mean, it's okay. We're not expecting you to be experts at screen capture technology, but there are some links. If we go back to the modules, I think it's in here. I did want to show you this too, so I'm glad. In the module, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, past all of the weekly lessons, there's a student resources module. I'm not sure why they put it there, because 2/3 of people miss that it exists. It's all the way here at the bottom. And in here is like a link directly to Wiley Plus support. So you can just fill out a help ticket if you're having problems with Wiley Plus. Link to the Academic Support Center. How students can use Zoom. I use Zoom actually to record when I'm doing tutorials, so it's a way to do that. How to embed video in a discussion post, which is something you'll need for that, and additional things. Also, I put a link to my additional study content. That same thing I put into the weekly announcement, I put it down there too, just because it's a student resource. And once we have a summary of all of the weekly presenters, I'll also put a link to it down there. But because it's way at the bottom, students seem to miss it a lot. So again, to get to that, you click on modules and then you scroll all the way down to the bottom, and it's there. So there is some help if you're wanting to make a video and then embed it in the discussion post. There's some instruction on how to do that. Does that help, Charmaine? Is it
yes,
Charmaine?
Charmian, thank you.
Okay, it looks like Charmian, but I've never heard that name, so I guessed Charmaine. I'm sorry.
No, you're great. Thanks, Brother Fox.
All right. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Okay.
Have you already created the discussion groups?
So the discussion groups were randomly generated. I created 5 groups and told Canvas to put randomly select 10 people into each group. I'm always willing or able to make adjustments if somebody has a specialized need or desire to be in a specific group. But really, I don't think anybody's ever actually requested that. So they've been created, but I'm open to discussion if needed.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions before I move into some lesson specific material?
No.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let me bring up where do I have that at? It's on my other screen over here. So this is just, well, right now it's just a blank screen. Why is it doing that? So this is just some information put out by the textbook publisher. And they put like 80 slides out for each chapter, and that's just way too much. So I trimmed it down to just some of the main slides that I think are valuable. If you ever want to see this whole slideshow, you can actually go into the Wiley Plus Read, Study, and Practice. And then on here for contents, you can choose the chapter. And if you scroll down, there is always somewhere, where am I missing it? A PowerPoint review. And this has all the slides. I used this straight out of the publisher material, and then I just cut out a lot of the slides because it's just too much to go through. But if you ever want to look at the full thing, it's there. Also, in case you missed it, when you're here in Read, Study, Practice, besides the stuff you're required to do for the required self-study, there's a ton of other information, including walkthrough videos that are put together by the publishers themselves and not just by me, some random guy. So that's available there for you too. Anyway, so let me pull that back up. And then I'll kind of go through it like a little brief presentation here for you. So in this chapter, you're being introduced to the basic financial statements. They start with the income statement, and then they do the statement of retained earnings, and then the balance sheet. I apologize if you're interpreting to have to do all of these financial terms, but I bet you'll do great. So an income statement summarizes revenues and expenses. Revenues are this is just money you make from selling products or services to customers. That's all revenue is. An expense is just the cost of doing business. So all of those operating expenses, paying your employees, paying rent on your building, supplies, etc., those are expenses. So our revenues minus our expenses are our net income. Net income is, sometimes you'll hear that referred to as profit. And some of you have probably had like a fundamentals of accounting or a basic accounting course before this. Others might be coming into this brand new. So recognizing that the income statement is revenues and expenses is really foundational and important. You have to understand how each of these statements sort of interconnects with each other. An income statement measures the revenues and expenses over a period of time. So you'll see on the one I have on the screen, this says for the month ended October 31st, 2017. That means these are all the revenues collected minus all of the expenses paid during the month of October, gives us a net income for the month of October. So recognize that this happens over a period of time. The statement right next to it is called a statement of retained earnings. If a business makes a profit or a net income, but those two terms can be used synonymously, okay, a net profit or a net income. If a business makes a profit, their choice is either to retain it, hold it into the business, or pay it out to the owners of the business in the form of what's called dividends. So the statement of retained earnings summarizes that process. So this business must have been a new business because they had $0 in retained earnings at the beginning of the month. They added in their net income. That was the money that they made, the excess of revenues over expenses. And then they subtract out the dividends. Those are the amounts paid out to the owners. And that leaves them with a retained earnings of $23.60 at the end of the period. In other words, this is earnings or income earned by the business that it did not pay out to the owners, is the retained earnings. We have a question I thought I saw.
Yes, so you were saying there's the net income. That's the profit, in other words, right? So
Yes.
if I set up a business, is it after expenses, that's the net income, or is it this amount 2360, which reflects that all of the expenses are taken out? Is the net income? Are they the same thing?
Okay. So, is he done? Okay.
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt. So our revenue minus our expenses is our net income right here. And then this amount here is our net income minus any amount the owners have taken out of the business for themselves. So when the owner gets paid a dividend as a part of their share of ownership, that's not considered an expense. That is something different than an expense called a dividend. If you're a sole proprietor, meaning you own the business outright, and you're not structured as a corporation, we would actually call, instead of dividends, we call this an owner's draw. It's just the owner pulling a share of the profits out for themselves. But the reason it's not an expense is because the corporation will only get taxed on its net income. But the corporation, the IRS does not want to allow you to pull dividends out before taxation. So this is the taxable part, and then these dividends here are going to get paid. So that's actually one of the challenges of a corporation, is they'll pay taxes on this full amount, the net income, and then the owner will get taxed again on any dividends they take out at the dividend rate. So thanks IRS for double taxing corporations. That's what makes America great.
Wow, that hurts.
Yeah, we're not even talking about Social Security or Medicare taxes yet. That'll be later. Uh, Hadney, is that your name? Is that how you pronounce it? Am I close?
Yes.
Are you a business owner?
No, I've worked for certified public accounts
Okay,
before.
okay,
And yeah, yeah, I get you.
okay. I'm just seeing the nodding, and you know the pain of it, I guess. All right. So the statement of retained earnings, again, this page just summarizes pretty much what I just said. It also covers the retained earnings for a period of time. So this is the month ended October 31st. And it always starts with the retained earnings at the beginning of the period. We add in any net income from the period, subtract out any dividends paid to the owners during the period, and then we're left with the retained earnings at the end of the period. And then that leads us to a balance sheet. The balance sheet has the balances of all of the accounts of the corporation. And so sometimes people think it's called a balance sheet because the assets will equal the total liabilities plus stockholders' equity. Those numbers will always equal each other. And so people think, oh, it balances, so it's called a balance sheet. But it's actually called a balance sheet because it has the balances of each of these accounts, the cash account, the accounts receivable, etc. So here's something you'll notice that's different than the income statement and the statement of retained earnings. Rather than the time period, whoops, let me go back up. Rather than the time period being the month ended October 31st, so a period of time, a balance sheet actually has a single date on it. So what this is saying is this is the balance of these accounts as of this day, not over a period of time. The accounts on a balance sheet all have a set balance as of a certain day. Okay, so this is broken into three types of accounts. We have asset accounts. Assets are things that a company owns. The most common one that I think that most of us understand is cash. You need cash to operate. Accounts receivable can be a little more confusing. This is money owed to you by your customers. So this is usually created informally when a customer purchases something from us and we say, you can pay us in the future. You can pay
I'm
me
sorry,
within
what was
30 days.
that second category? You said assets and then,
Oh, assets, liabilities, and stockholders' equity are the three categories. So accounts receivable is a type of asset, and it represents money owed to you by customers. Supplies, I think we know mostly what those are. Prepaid assets are a little different. This would be if I paid for insurance in advance. So let's say I paid for a whole year's worth of insurance. That would create an asset called prepaid insurance. And then each month I would recognize using some of that prepaid asset up until I'd fully used it up. We'll get more into the details of it later in the course. Equipment, all of those things add up to our total assets. Liabilities are debts that the business owes. So we have notes payable. That means loans we've taken from someone else. It's called a note because generally you fill out a piece of paper that has all of the details of how much you owe and how much interest you're going to pay, and then you sign it, and that's called the note. Accounts payable, these arise when we purchase something from a supplier and they give us time to pay. So they'll deliver goods to us that we can sell in our store and tell us, pay us within 30 days. So those are just debts owed to suppliers. Unearned revenues, these are when customers pay us in advance. So we receive the cash, but we still owe the customer goods or services in the future. So an unearned revenue is just what it sounds like. It's money we've received but have not yet earned. Salaries and wages payable, again, this is money owed to our employees. They've worked, but it's not payday yet, so we haven't paid them yet. So those are the liabilities. Liabilities are debts. So just remember that assets are things the company owns and that liabilities are debts that the company owes. The last category is stockholders' equity. And this represents money that was invested by the owners. That's called common stock in a corporation. Okay. If this were a sole proprietorship, we would call it an owner contribution. But in a corporation, we call it common stock. That's just the money that people have paid in to own the business. Anytime a business starts, you need capital or money to run the business. So for example, I own a rental storage business. My mother and I went in partners. We each put in $40,000, and that allowed us to buy the land and to build our first building. So on our balance sheet, we would show a common stock of $80,000 that would be contributions made by the owners. And then the last one is retained earnings, which we already discussed from the statement of retained earnings, which is any money the business has made, its net income, minus any dividends that's paid out to the owners. So the stockholders' equity really represents the amount of the business that is owned, that belongs to the owners or the stockholders. Where does that come from? It either comes from money they've put in or money the business has earned and not paid out. So that's why the assets always have to add up to the liabilities and stockholders' equity, because all of the assets of the business minus anything the business owes is how much the owners own, okay? So that's what a balance sheet summarizes. If you think about it, these three statements really summarize a lot of information that can really tell you a lot about the financial situation of a business once you get comfortable reading it and understanding what's there for you. So again, this just summarizes the balance sheet. As I mentioned, this little statement right here, assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity, this is known as the fundamental or the basic accounting equation. It's kind of everything in accounting sort of hinges around this simple little formula that assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. All right, the last statement that we're going to talk about today is the statement of cash flows. So the statement of, so in many businesses, not all revenues that we earn are paid in cash right away. Sometimes customers will pay us later for services we're providing today. So even though we provided the service and we record it as revenue, we may not be getting all of that in cash, or at least not right now. We might get it at a future date, or we might receive cash in advance of services. In my storage business, it happens all the time where people pay me for a whole year's worth, but I have to now provide the service to them for the whole year. And so a statement of cash flows, and then the same thing happens with expenses. Sometimes we will purchase things, but not pay for them till later, or sometimes we'll prepay for certain expenses. And so the statement of cash flows helps us reconcile all that and tells us exactly how much cash is coming in from our operating activities, from our investing activities, which means the purchase of assets such as buildings or land or other long-term assets that will last us more than just one month or 1 year of the business cycle. And then cash flows from financing, which is borrowing or issuing stock, which means having people buy into the business. It summarizes all of that cash. So here we can see that this business brought in $5,700 from operating, but they spent $5,000 on office equipment. But they also issued some stock, meaning let somebody buy into the company. An owner paid in $10,000, and they borrowed $5,000, and they paid out $500 in dividends. So in total, they actually had $15,200 in new cash. They started with zero. Now they have $15,200. So that's what the statement of cash flow summarizes. I know it's a lot of information all at once. The trick in accounting, because the math isn't hard usually, it's usually addition and subtraction, occasionally multiplication, but not, this isn't an algebra or a calculus class. The more challenging part of accounting is categorizing things into the proper categories. That's where things get a little bit confusing. And so if you just take it one step at a time, it's usually pretty manageable. But if you start trying to think globally, like, oh, well, how does this affect everything else? It's really easy to get confused pretty quickly. I'm married to an artist, and she does amazing art. And she asks me to handle the financial stuff because her mind is so global. She thinks of such big things that she gets confused. And when I go to try to watch her paint and start this huge, 150-foot long mural, and I don't understand how she can conceptualize this whole space. I've just learned that that's not my domain, and I trust her because she does amazing work. And she trusts me with this. She just texts me and says, send an invoice to the client. And I say, yes, ma'am. So maybe we're fortunate in our little business ventures that we have those different minds. All right, so this was just a summary of the statement of cash flow, so there's no other additional information. So there's my little presentation. So now I would kind of open up the floor for any specific questions, either about the material I presented, or maybe about a specific problem you're working on, or the meaning of life, or anything else. I don't know how I feel about the European Super League, whatever.
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry, I have so many questions. This is important to me. So when you talked about assets, that's usually the first thing that you start with, right?
That's the first thing you list on the balance sheet, yes.
I'm trying to remember the term. I think it's assets retained or something like that, or income
Retained
retained.
earnings.
Pardon?
Retained earnings.
Yes. Okay. So that's the term, retained earnings. It would start with that, and also, but at the cash flow, that's at the end. Is that right?
Yeah. So these are good questions. And so if we look back at this, these were actually done in the same order we would actually create them in a real life setting. So we would start. Let me go up. We would start with the income statement, and we would measure our revenues minus our expenses for the period. And the reason we have to start here is because the net income on that income statement is needed for us to calculate our retained earnings. Our retained earnings is the beginning of the period plus any net income minus any dividends gives us our retained earnings at the end. And the reason we do this second is because retained earnings are needed to create our balance sheet, because we have to have our retained earnings for the stockholders' equity section. So on the balance sheet, we list the assets first, then the liabilities, then the stockholders' equity. And so when we're creating financial statements, we have to go in that order because information flows from the income statement to the statement of retained earnings to the balance sheet. And then the statement of cash flows requires information from all of them to create.
Oh, that a light bulb went off. Okay, that makes sense.
Other specific or semi-specific questions? Don't actually ask me about the European Super League. And it's okay if we're good. If we're done, that's fine too. Don't feel obligated to ask a question. Okay.
Oh, I did have one more.
Okay.
Talking about the cash flow. That's referring to profits, right? Cash flow.
So not necessarily. So cash flows can come from operating activities, which would include any money we've received from customers or money we're paying out to suppliers or other expenses. So that includes, you know, the money we're earning as far as our profits. But it's different in the sense that here we're just talking about cash. And so if I record a revenue, I may or may not have collected that money yet. I record revenues when I earn them. So if I do the work for somebody, then I'll record that as a revenue, even if I tell them they can pay me in 60 days or some other period of time. And so with the statement of cash flows, we're just talking about the cash we receive from customers, regardless of whether we earned it this month or this quarter or in a previous quarter, but we're collecting it now. But it also summarizes cash flows for things that would not be listed as an expense, like purchasing equipment or buildings, those are costs that we're going to spread out and take as an expense over an extended period of time. Something we'll learn more about later. And also,
a flow of money.
yes, because whether or not you're profitable matters, but also you could be profitable but run out of cash if you haven't collected that cash from your customers. And so you've got to track those two things separately.
Okay.
All right. If there's no other questions, we can call it a night. We can end with a prayer if anybody is feeling like they need the extra blessings of offering a prayer. And do I have a volunteer? I don't know any of you well enough to just call on you. It might really mortify somebody. So I don't want to do that to anyone without knowing you yet. Anybody willing to offer a prayer?
I can do it.
Okay.
Dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful for this beautiful night that we had to be able to learn more and to review some things. And we are grateful for the opportunity that we have to continue our education. We are grateful for our families and for thy love and thy patience with us. We ask thee a special blessing on us for our minds and our brains to be able to open, for us to be able to understand and retain everything we read and we study. Help us be kind to one another and help us be kind to everyone around us. Help us in all our endeavors, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. And if you have a question come up during the week, put it in the discussion board, and then instead of just emailing me, I can respond. And because probably if you have a question, someone else does too, and they were just afraid to ask, so don't ever be afraid to put it in there, and I'll respond for everyone. All right. Have a great night.
Thank you, Brother Fox.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Yeah.